Hey, it's Doug with Backcountry Pilgrim. I'm here to talk to you today about an exciting new sport that is kind of filling in the gap between hiking and rock climbing. It's called Via Ferrata. Via Ferrata means the Iron Way or the Iron Path. In German, it is called Klettersteig, which is a combination of climbing and mountain path. In the Dolomite Mountains, which form the Italian-Austrian border, the first Via Ferrata routes were installed in the late 1800s by local mountain guides to help their clients make tricky ascents. Basically, what was installed were iron rungs and spikes and pedals and cables and ladders and whatever else was needed to safely get people from point A to point B in a mountain range that they wouldn't normally be able to climb otherwise. This kind of system was also used in World War I as a way to move troops quickly carrying heavy gear who could not risk sport-type climbing to get over the mountains. After World War II, the Italian Alpine Club started putting in additional safety measures, such as cable systems like the one I have built here as a prop behind me, to make the Via Ferratas even safer, and they became something of a tourist attraction. In 1958, the first sport Via Ferrata route was put in. By the 1980s, going on a Via Ferrata route had started to become very popular, and they started to show up in thousands of places all across Europe. By the 1990s, they had spread across the globe, and recently they have started becoming popular in the United States of America as well. It might be argued that one of the very first Via Ferrata routes in the United States was the cable system put up on California's Half Dome in Yosemite National Park. And they are becoming popular in places not just where rock climbers like to go, but in places like ski lodges that are looking for something for people to do in the off-season. The idea of a Via Ferrata is that you are basically aid climbing certain mountain routes. Iron rungs, pedals, ladders, and even cable bridges are strategically fixed into rock faces along a safety cable route, which passes through several anchor transition points, sometimes going under overhangs, through caves, or even including zip lines for more challenge. Now, the idea of a Via Ferrata is not to take the place of rock climbing, but rather to extend a hiker's ability to get beyond the class 2 or 3 routes they would normally be safe on and get up into the 4s or even the 5s and 6s, which is an impossibility to climb without aid, and be able to do so in a decent amount of time with regular experience instead of having to do technical rock climbing. Now, because of the existence of this climbing aid gear permanently fixed into the rock, Via Ferratas sometimes get a little bit of criticism from the rock climbing community because it's not real rock climbing. Well, it's not trying to be rock climbing. Via Ferratas are not typically put in places where people would go rock climbing in the first place. They are much longer routes, and they typically involve going all the way up and over entire mountain ranges and not simply doing certain super technical climbing areas. It's just a completely different kind of sport. Now, as far as safety goes, Via Ferrata can actually be as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than rock climbing. Now, because of the special kinds of dangers involved with a Via Ferrata, there is specialized gear to help keep you safe. I'm going to go over that in a minute, but first I want to talk about the actual danger of a Via Ferrata versus the danger of rock climbing. If you've ever seen someone take a big fall in rock climbing, it can seem pretty dramatic, and believe me, it feels like it. The cool thing about rock climbing gear, though, is that almost all of it is designed to keep you not only safe from dying, but safe from even getting hurt on a big fall. The dynamic, stretchable rope that is used and the kinds of systems that are in place, along with the fact that you've got a live belayer who is able to even leap off the ground if they need to give you a softer catch, keeps most rock climbing falls from being dangerous. In rock climbing, falling can be frustrating, but it's expected. If you're not falling, you're probably not trying very hard. In Via Ferrata, it is different. The number one rule of Via Ferrata is do not fall on a Via Ferrata. And the reason for this has to do with the kinds of falls that you would take if you're on a Via Ferrata versus going rock climbing. When you're talking about falling on gear, there is this notion of a fall factor. And a fall factor basically is the ratio of how far you fall versus how much rope you have to fall on. So for example, if you had 5 feet of rope connecting you to your anchor and you were 5 feet below that anchor, you would basically be hanging on the rope. And if you were to let go, you wouldn't actually fall at all because you are already at the maximum length of the rope. That would be a fall factor of 0. However, let's suppose that you climbed up and the anchor was now level with your waist and where your rope was connected. If you were to fall now, you would fall 5 feet, the whole length of the rope, before you stopped. And because you fell 5 feet on 5 feet of rope, that's a fall factor of 1. Now, if you were to climb above your anchor, and let's say you were just about to get to the next anchor and you fell there, you would first fall the 5 feet that you are above your anchor. Then you would fall 5 feet past your anchor before that rope caught you. You'd be falling 10 feet on 5 feet of rope, and that's a fall factor of 2. Now, because of the way rope protection is set up in rock climbing, you should never experience a fall with a greater factor than 2. In fact, it's kind of impossible the way it is typically set up because you can't climb farther than your rope. Fall factors of 2 happen all the time, and while they are certainly less pleasant than a smaller fall factor, they are not considered dangerous to your health because of the kind of gear that is being used to catch you. In fact, there are people that jump off of big canyons with rock climbing gear on just to have a good time. Now, the problem that you have with a Via Ferrata is that if you are climbing vertically, you're actually moving your carabiner system that attaches you to your harness up between the anchors. When you get to the next transition, you unclip one at a time and move on. Now, from right here, if I were to fall, I would be at something of a factor 0 fall because I'm already extended on my gear to this anchor. However, if I climb up and above this, if I fall, I will fall down to this anchor, past the anchor, before the Via Ferrata set catches me. So as you can imagine, if I am reaching to get this anchor made and I fall, first I'm going to fall all the way down to the anchor below me. Then I'm going to fall past the anchor. And I'm doing all of that on a relatively small system. That means that fall factors higher than 2 can be had on Via Ferrata, and you are falling on a system that is not as dynamic as you might think it is. A further difficulty with a fall on a Via Ferrata is that you are probably going to be hitting things on the way down. Whereas in a rock climbing fall where you sort of want to launch yourself off of the rock face for a nice smooth fall, Via Ferrata falls are typically going to be more like slips. You're still going to be right up against the rock, right up against the rungs or whatever else it is you're climbing on. And so there is a lot more to hit on the way down. So let's go over some of the specialized gear that is used in a Via Ferrata. From top to bottom, first you're going to want a rock climbing helmet. While you will sometimes see rock climbers climbing without helmets, a helmet is also going to help if something falls onto you. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do a Via Ferrata without one. Next are gloves. This is not something you typically see with rock climbing because it interferes with your grip, but for a Via Ferrata, because you're grabbing onto metal things while you are climbing, it can be incredibly rough on your skin. The first Via Ferrata I did, I ended up with a huge blister on this finger that was just past where the glove stopped. Now, most people on a Via use these half-finger type gloves, and the reason for this is that you do still want to retain some dexterity to deal with your gear and some of the moves you have to make, because sometimes you are actually on bare rock, even on a Via Ferrata route. But when you are grabbing onto the iron, you're going to want some good sturdy gloves to keep you from tearing your skin up. I'm going to skip this for now and go on to the shoes. Just like a Via Ferrata is kind of a midway between hiking and rock climbing, approach shoes are in between something like a trail runner and a climbing shoe. Now, a climbing shoe is not something you're going to want to wear on almost any Via Ferrata. The kinds of things that you need to do in rock climbing you don't need to do on a Via, but having some good stiff toes like climbing shoes, having some good stiff soles like climbing shoes can be very helpful when you're out on one. In general though, a good trail runner is going to do just fine. You're not going to want to have big heavy hiking or mountaineering boots, however. Okay, so that brings us to this strange looking setup right here. If you're not a climber, you probably don't recognize much of this, and if you are a climber, you probably don't recognize some of it. But this is a pretty standard Via Ferrata set, at least insofar as it has the kind of gear that you need, even if you don't have these exact models. The Via Ferrata set begins with a climbing harness. This is just a standard rock climbing harness. Now, the good news if you're getting into Via Ferrata and you're not already a rock climber is that you don't have to go real high end on your harness. Typically, the higher end harnesses are more about comfort and features that you will not need on a Via Ferrata. All you need is a rock climbing rated climbing harness and you will be good to go. Attached to your harness is the actual Via Ferrata lanyard set and a resting system should you choose to have one. I would highly recommend it. Now, a Via Ferrata set is different than just, say, attaching a sling with a carabiner onto your climbing harness, clipping onto the cable, and going for it. That creates a static system, which means that if you take a fall, you could do serious damage both to yourself and to your gear. It might not even withstand a fall. Static climbing gear is for holding a person in place on the rock, not for falling on. So if you're a climber and you've got some cool slings laying around and a couple of carabiners, don't think that you can just girth hitch these onto your climbing harness and go for it. Again, the kinds of falls that are possible to take on a Via Ferrata exceed the fall factor 2, and you do not want to fall on something like that on a static system. So what is all this? First of all, you have your big carabiners. Now, there are some Via Ferrata sets that just use normal, small, even locking carabiners. I do not recommend those. You are going to be clipping and unclipping these over and over and over again, and you don't want to be messing around with the kinds of locking systems and stuff that you find on most climbing carabiners. Another thing that makes these special, besides being kind of oversized and having this cool safety lock that lets you unlock quickly with a grip but won't unlock when you're not gripping, is that these are much higher rated than climbing carabiners. Because of the way the anchors are set up on some of these can get bound up and could even end up cross-loaded or horizontal. These carabiners have to be rated for different kinds of falls that rock climbing carabiners don't, because typically they are just routing the rope, and a fall on one of those is not going to generate nearly as much force as a high fall factor fall that you could experience on a Via Ferrata. So for example, this one is rated at 28 kilonewtons on the long axis. It's got a 7 kilonewton rating on a cross load and 12 with the gate open. That is pretty burly. That is not the sort of thing you would normally take rock climbing with you. Now, these are attached to the next piece with these elasticized arms. Okay, the reason they're all curled up here is because there's some strong elastic in there. What is inside here, though, is a static strap. The elastic is more about keeping the straps out of your way when you are climbing than providing much of a shock system. This much shock absorbing is not nearly enough to really help. It's basically a static system until you get to here. So the reason that you have 2 of these lanyards is so that as you're going along past anchor points, you don't unclip and then fall and have nothing to back you up. So you can actually fall on either one of these and still be safe. Once you've made one transition, you're now free to take the next one and make that transition, and now you move on. Now, on this particular set, there is one additional piece. This is a little gyro on here. that keeps the lanyard arms from getting crossed over. If you are making one-hand transitions quick, you often kind of leapfrog your carabiners, and you're very quickly going to corkscrew your lanyard arms if you don't have something that can spin. So that's something else I recommend as well. The heart of the Via Ferrata set is this shock absorber right here. Inside this bag is a static strap that is wrapped back and forth in here, and then sewn through all the way top to bottom. And what that does is provide a system that has to actually be torn out of this bag if you take a fall. And it's that tearing action that creates a dynamic system out of static materials. Now the problem is, once this tears out, it's done. You only get one fall on a Via Ferrata set, and then you throw it away. Now, back in the old days, they used to use these things called screamers. They're basically these metal plates that a rope could be woven through. This would attach to your carabiner, this would attach to the other side, and if you ever shock load it, it's got to pull the rope through all of those little holes until it comes out. And if you set it up correctly, this will work to turn a static piece of material into a dynamic system. However, you've really got to know what you're doing. You've got to be very aware of exactly how much force you're going to be putting on that plate, and you better hope you don't accidentally exceed it. Ready? Okay. All right. Oh! That's totally good. Yep, that's the setting. So for those reasons, these are not used anymore. Modern Via Ferrata sets operate on a static strap sewn through, which creates a dynamic shock absorber if you fall. This whole thing is simply girth hitched into your belay loop, and you're good to go. So let's move on to this thing. On a Via Ferrata route, you are going to often be going for hours without being able to find a good place to just stop and sit down and rest. If you get to a point where you're getting pumped and you need to let go and relax your arms or your body a bit, you don't really want to be doing that by clipping in with your Via Ferrata set and then leaning back and putting pressure on it. The chances of it deploying are pretty low. However, you are putting stress on a system that is not meant to feel stress unless you fall. So it is not recommended that you use your Via Ferrata set to hold you when you are resting. And that is why another piece of gear is a good idea. Now, what I've got right here is the Petzl Adjust. In my opinion, this is the best thing you can get for a rest system for a Via Ferrata. It's got this little toggle on it that allows you to adjust how long the rope is. Once you clip into your cable, you just pull this until it is tight, and then you can lean back and relax. The other nice thing about this is that it can act as a sort of third arm if your safety cable system is above your waist. So let's say I'm crossing a bridge and I've got a cable up here, and if I'm not feeling safe enough with my Via Ferrata lanyard, I can clip my resting system up there too, and now I've got something where if I fall, I don't actually fall at all because I can crank this down until I am basically at a fall factor of 0. Now the caveat to this is that you don't want to be attaching your third arm resting system if you are in a situation where you could actually fall onto your Via Ferrata set. And here's why. Let's suppose I'm walking along with my carabiner at this level. If I fall, this is not even going to get a chance to engage because it's going to be stopped by my resting system. So while it's pretty safe in a situation like this where I can crank this until I really can't fall at all, so you can imagine if I accidentally left my resting system attached on a vertical section and I got up way up here and fell, these would come all the way down, hit the anchor, and then I would continue falling. However, if my static system stops me before my Via Ferrata can even get involved, I've basically fallen on a static system instead of the dynamic system that was meant to protect me. Although many Via Ferrata sets have an area to clip in a resting system, I don't like to use these. Number one, because you are still putting strain on your shock absorber, but number two, if you accidentally attach this back to your harness, you could inadvertently nullify your Via Ferrata system, because when you fall, it would deploy only until you hit the end of your rest system, and now you've taken a static fall and the Via Ferrata set hasn't had a chance to protect you. Do learn the ratings on Via Ferrata. Just like rock climbing, there are different ratings of difficulty. Now, not everybody has settled on exactly which one of the numerous ones that exist they're going to use, but you should be able to figure it out. I would strongly recommend starting off with something fairly easy, something more touristy, because it can be a lot harder than you might expect. If you want to have a look at my first Via Ferrata, that was in Tahoe a couple of weeks ago with Alpenglow Expeditions. They were fantastic. I highly recommend them. So that is a Via Ferrata. I have links to all of this gear in the description below if you would like to take a look at it. Using those links does help the channel at no cost to you. I'm Doug, this is Backcountry Pilgrim. Thanks for watching.